Me, Balkrishna Doshi, is a celebration of his boundless vision, his relentless pursuit of excellence, and his unwavering commitment to architecture that resonates with very soul of humanity. Today, we have the privilege of delving into the world of Doshi through an enlightening dialogue with architect Narendra Denge. As we all know, Denge sir is an architect, author, artist, and educator based in Pune since 1987. His projects over the last 5 decades have been executed in tribal, rural, and urban centers in India and the Sultanate of Oman. His projects include schools for tribal children, educational campuses, hospitality and resorts, healthcare, software offices, temples, floriculture and industrial projects, conservation projects, and housing as well. He was founding partner of the group 1974 to 86 in New Delhi. He taught at SPA New Delhi from 1974 to 1986. He has been the chair of design at KRVI Mumbai, academic chair at CGA Goa, and academic chair at PVP College Pune. He is the faculty and chair of the Asian Advisory Board, Building Beauty Program at Sorrento, Italy. His books include Zaroka, published in 2006, it's a Marathi book, The Discovery of Architecture, a contemporary treatise on ancient values and indigenous reality, co-authored with M.N. Ashish Ganju, published in 2013, Dialogues with Indian Master Architects in 2016, and Architecture in Maharashtra, Tradition and Journey, Volumes 1 and 2, publication is yet awaiting. He is deeply concerned about the wholeness of life, connections with ancient wisdom, and the processes of its manifestation in art and architecture. I request Denge sir to please share his thoughts with us.
Good evening. It's a wonderful occasion, and which began in the morning and began maybe 1.5 months back for the volunteers of road. So many congratulations to the volunteers of road and the moving spirit behind that is Girish Doshi. And it's quite a remarkable feat to sustain such an activity for so many years. To begin with, I want to quote somebody who's a very contemporary sage, Maharashtrian sage, Nisargadatta Maharaj. Once I read about in his book, and he says, how can you remember something which you have never forgotten? Now, this is a very complex thing. How do you remember things which you have never forgotten? They're always with you. You will always forget. You will always remember what you have forgotten. So if I have written something here, I may forget. But something that is endowed with all of us is never forgotten. And I think the same thing applies to Doshi and his works. So one doesn't have to remember Doshi, because one will never forget Doshi. You know, all over this country, elsewhere, and his persona is left such a deep impression on the students, on his mentors, on his clients, and on his associates. So it's a very collective participatory act, architecture is. And I remember meeting Doshi in 1967 for the first time. I was a third-year student, and our professor Palshikar had taken us tour to Gujarat and Rajasthan and so on. And this inevitable halt was at Doshi's place as well. And we spent some time at SEPT looking at this. But what I want to point out here is the first building that we saw was the Indology building. And I'm not showing any buildings and visuals here because I think you are all familiar with his work, and they are all exhibited there on the on Ferguson College Road. Indology is also there. Now, as a student of third year, one had studied something in Pune, and one had studied Corbusier a little bit without understanding the philosophy. But looking at the visuals, looking at the images, one was deeply impressed, and one was also very influenced by the visual form. And when one went to this place, Indology, I was quite struck by the correctness of many things. It looked as if it's a completely well-defined form from one end to the other, from top to the bottom. Every single detail. It could not be changed because it had to be in exposed concrete. The detailing from the floor, how the skirtings are done, how the flooring is done, how the louvers are placed, how the railing, etc., etc., etc. So the whole form and its elements that made the form was complete. There was nothing that was kind of outsourced, if you like. Today, looking at today's situation, you will understand what I'm saying. And like the human form or every living organism is born, it's born holistically. Arms and heads are not outsourced. These are not parts. They belong to the whole. They come together. And then you can say that this is my arm. And actually when I say that this is my arm, my left arm, actually it's part of me. So it's not just the arm. So when the building was done, Indology building, and one is talking about it in so many terms now. In those days, one was just admiring and looking at this very severe exposed concrete, very perfect form. And the next day, I think we went to a housing project by Doshi. And that was fertilizer housing. I don't know whether Girish remembers that. Fertilizer housing had a particular kind of water tank and some community space below. And we were joking that it looks like a Primus stove, you know. It looks like a stove which you pump, and it was also an exquisitely defined form, but it was in brick. And the housing did not look so defined as the Indology building was. So there was a difference in the housing project and the monumental building. More one comes to know Doshi, one realizes, and one has done projects in different places, one realizes perhaps there are three kinds of buildings that we do. We do monumental buildings, we do housing, and we do institutions. Under institutions, many kinds of classifications can happen. So broadly speaking, there are these three sort of categories. And we confuse, many times what happens is we confuse the first category with the other. Doshi never confused that. And his housing from the day one was very, very sort of humble and inhibitious of the spaces that will be created. He went back and forth designing these, and then before he refined. Today, when we look at Aranya, the original Aranya form is no more there. So the whole thing has changed. So there is this continuous form continuous change that is happening to the form is a very important aspect. So I feel that the processes that make architecture are so many, and it cannot be linear. Like the Indology building was done, you cannot be doing every building. Maybe once in a while you do that kind of a building, but you never can do housing like an Indology building. Housing will be changed, balconies will be added, families will enlarge in sizes, and like in Bombay, people will not leave those places, and children will get married, and they would not want to leave the place, and they will want to keep, utilizing the earlier house that looked good enough for a small family, and now it's very tight, almost like a slum. So I think these processes is something that Doshi himself talks about. And what are these processes? Now, Doshi has given innumerable lectures that that are very difficult to decodify. And he retained his spontaneity forever. And you realize that what he's talking about, and when you relate it to his building, now is the Indology building Doshi? Is the Indology building, therefore, can it be made equivalent to what Doshi was? Yes and no, both. Because Doshi did that building, but he walked out of it. Because he did not repeat this as a formula. So that's a very important thing to remember. When you looked at the housing or you looked at the institutions like CEPT and IIT, and you realize that the next generation will come, next generation will destroy, modify. Housing is done that way. And it's never preserved, never conserved completely. Life is not like that. So Doshi's pursuit of ideas, observation of people, places, nature, and he talks about seasons, he talks about, a number of seasons affecting courtyard, light falling here and there. And then I want to bring to your attention what he mentions, and I quote him. And this is, I thought, very interesting. He's saying, and I quote him, we are always thinking about the world which we don't have. What does he mean by that? But let me read this sentence completely. We are always thinking of the world which we don't have. Because the other world has no market. We are going to touch, when we are going to touch the other side, he's asking that question. When are we going to touch the other side? And this is the concern of the last 50 years of my work. Now I'm wondering, what does he mean by this? We are always thinking of the world which we don't have. What does that mean? We are living in this world, but are we thinking of the world which we don't have? Is he talking about some other world, other planet? A spiritual realm? Is it Adhyatmic world that we don't have? And one realizes this is an open thing. We can go back to this question again and again. And he says, because this world has no market. So this other world that he's talking about, and the other world that he's trying to create or go across this river to the other side for the last 50 years. And he said, and probably he doesn't say it, but has he succeeded? Has he not succeeded? This is the question that kind of bothers him. I want to leave this question with you. It's all over the place. I mean, he has mentioned this in several times, but it came to me when I was thinking about today's talk. Then also he mentions An Indian Sthapati has to be a yogi. I do hope that by that yogi, I don't think he meant a political yogi. He must feel the vibrations in the cosmos. How do you feel the vibrations in the cosmos? I don't know. And this is something that my friend Ganju and I were talking about. And we were talking about, are we all the time aware of the evolving cosmos? And then you realize that your consciousness, in this case, is non-reducible. Consciousness does not reduce. This is it. And actually from there springs imagination, there springs visualization. Once you're born here, you're born with consciousness. You're conscious about something, conscious of something. And this is something that Doshi is very much aware of. So on the one hand, he's a teacher, he's a thinker, and he's thinking about it. He's not necessarily thinking about buildings. And whatever he's thinking about, he wants to bring to his building in some manner or the other, obviously. I don't know whether one succeeds in doing this, but I think there one has to realize, Doshi also talks about the Japanese life and Japanese culture and so on. And there are three things which are mentioned in wabi-sabi, which I think many of you may have known. Wabi-sabi is one of the terms which, the Japanese aesthetic term, but it's not just aesthetic, it's the holistic life-related term. And it says that there is no such thing as perfection. It says that there is no such thing as finished job. There is no such thing as finishing. And the third thing wabi-sabi says is there is nothing here that is going to live forever. So all the three things have to be seen in whatever one is doing. One is doing this desk here, lectern, or a stage, or a building. And when we go back, again I go back to Indology. An Indology building cannot be added on to. Now to that I feel, I want to quote again Corbusier. I was rather Raje, because I was sitting with Mr. Anant Raje, and he was pointing out, I mentioned it to Girish the other day. He said that there was Shodhan's house being designed by Corbusier. And, the master was here and everybody was quiet. Nobody would ask a question of the master. And Shodhan family was not particularly happy about a particular window in one of the walls. And they said, what to do? So they came and talked to somebody, one of the Indian architects working with Corbusier. And they said, can we not change this window? I'm not very happy, it's not comfortable at all, and several reasons. He said, what are you talking about? You can't raise this kind of question to the master. You can't raise this question to Corbusier. And everything was hushed up. But I think somebody from the Shodhan family raised this question when Corbusier came on a site visit. And Corbusier looked at the question very seriously and said, and spent half a day resolving that window. How should that window be? Where should it be exactly located? What is the stuff that the owners really want to have? All these questions were kind of discussed thoroughly, which meant that howsoever you think that the building was complete and finite, Corbusier was aware of the fact that nothing is so finite. There is nothing finite at all. And you could be changing. But doesn't mean that you're changing like, my client wanted this and therefore I gave it to him. Not that way. So there was a very serious understanding of this. This is something that one learns from Doshi as well. And one learns that from his talks. I think the later or the more recent, maybe 20, 25 years of his life, he has been in the realm of wandering somewhere else. He's been thinking hard, he's been meditating, he's actually modified his own house. It was required. And then he's also changed his daughter's house. He designed it. And then I think his wife made suggestions. And then he sat down and changed that design. So there is, I think, something that needs to be learned there. So from the obsession of making form, and we are completely today bound, I think we continue to be, many of us, even colleges teach us to work on a cube. Meaning this is the final thing that you have to do. You have to make that form. Of course you have to make that form. But what is the process? You don't have to make the form that you know. Because if you have known that, what is the use of making it? So the whole process is a discovery. And there is nothing that is finite. And there is no process. And each kind of exercise is allowing us to reinvent ourselves, reinvent the project, reinvent what is finite in that project, and learn from that and take it ahead. I think this is something that one has to learn from Doshi. If you look at any old city, any old kasbah, if you look at Alhambra, or if you look at the Hadrian's Villa, they're wonderful projects, and they have been developed very well. Courtyards are there, the built forms are there, new forms are, or even Mandu. The next builder comes and he is very sympathetic to how this whole thing can gel, how can the past and the present and the future is a continuous thing, and there is no such compartment at all. There is no future. And therefore, at the moment, all the three time senses are embedded into this. So if you look at a city and the growth of a city, can the house, can the neighborhood, can a sort of so-called gated community housing, can that be allowed to grow on itself? Can it be allowed to unfold? Like the concept, the original concept of our design is allowed to be unfolded. And if these things are made possible, then I think what he's talking about is going on the other side of it and talking, again I'll read that. We're always thinking about the world which we don't have. We don't have our house. And I was talking that, people come from villages, they work with you, they stay with you, and then there is Ganesh festival and they want to go back home, which means this is not their home. They're living here, but it's not their home. So they want to go back home. And that is home. When they get back home, they realize that that also is not their home, because they actually come from some other place. And this is a riddle that I think has to be resolved, and Doshi is perhaps pointing out to this. As far as I'm concerned, I do feel that probably he thinks that way, that he's thinking about the world which we don't have. We don't have it as a matter, which we can't point out that this is my world and this is what I have. You cannot actually hold that idea. It is still very much a ghost. It is still very much a spirit, because the other world has no market. It is not a commodity of any kind. It's not an idea to be sold. It's not a built stuff that can be sold. When are we going to touch the other side? He's asking. When are we going to touch? We haven't even touched that. And by touch, I don't mean, or he probably doesn't mean physically. Spiritually, emotionally, how do we touch? Does it touch us? And he says that this is exactly what I've been trying in my life for the last 50 years. So, here is what I finally think, and I'll read this out, which I wrote yesterday. Architecture seems to be a process of giving shape to a lot of complex, unresolved expectations and desires of life and living, with others that include humans, nature, and other organisms. In the past, they talked about interspecies communication, that they are part of us. Today, we don't even think of them. Other organisms, and a conscious participation in its articulation. One enters a mysterious wisdom garden, if you like, as it were, to learn and observe life holistically and transform. So we are not remembering Doshi because we have never forgotten him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such insightful words. You have, as a true educator, helped us understand Doshi's values more with your talk. Thank you so much.